Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the 15th lecture hosted by AIRS. Today, we have a young scholar speaking, and his name is Vivek. Before I introduce him further, I'd like to call upon Zeba to read the progress of AIRS. Over to you, Zeba.
Thank you, Ivan. Let me just read out the progress of AIRS. Association of Indian Research Scholars, also known as AIRS, is the brainchild of the president, Ariba Ahsanat Mausam. It was created to bring together like-minded, intellectually inclined, and enthusiastic research scholars of our generation. It aims to collectively increase the knowledge base through interaction with the best minds in the world. So far, in the past 1.5 months, we have been able to have passionate discussions with Professor Mausam Ali, Professor Zoya Hassan, Professor Rajan Harshe, Professor Arun Patnaik, Professor Alfredo Toro Hardy, among others. The aim of this association has been to provide a platform for young scholars to connect with experts where they can have stimulating and interacting sessions with them. We have not only brought on the greats on our platform, but have also managed to start the Young Scholar Lecture Series, which one of which will be happening today, and modern, and also have done our first book discussion on the book China versus the U.S. Who Will Prevail by Professor Alfredo Hardy. The focus of the month of November has been on relevant topics with regards to social sciences research. We have been looking at the concept of war and warfare with two lectures. The first by Nuno Rodriguez on psychological warfare, theory and practical implications. The second lecture is an enticingly new topic, outer space warfare challenges, theory, doctrine, strategies, and tactics, which we had on the 22nd of November. AIRS is available on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, Telegram, as well as having its own site, airs.org.in. Thank you. Over to you, Ivan.
Thank you so much, Zeba. I would like to introduce Vivek. He is a friend of mine, so I'm very happy to welcome him on this forum today. So Vivek ND is an assistant professor at the School of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences, Oro University, where he teaches politics and public policy. He is also a PhD candidate at the University of Hyderabad, India. His thesis is on global health governance and the role of non-state actors in the politics of health governance and policy. His PhD research explores the politics of global health governance and policy making by comparing the cases of India and South Africa. His research interests lie within the interstices of international relations and policy analysis, focusing on the political economy effects of economic globalization and its impact on public policy in the context of Afro-Asian countries. He has varied experience of more than a decade within the corporate and academic spheres, involving research, reporting, and communicating in the areas of local and global politics, governance, and public policy. He was associate editor of ISB Insight, the Indian School of Business's research quarterly on management and policy. Prior to the PhD, he was a consultant with the government of Andhra Pradesh, engaged in monitoring and evaluation of projects related to the educational and health sectors. So before I hand over the mic, so to say, to Vivek, I would like to welcome you very warmly today. All the best, and we look forward to your lecture. Over to you, Vivek.
Thank you, Evangeline. Thanks for the warm introduction and thanks to AIRS for the opportunity to talk about some of my ongoing research as well as something I think which all of us have been sort of dropped in with the uncertain times we're living in right now. And I think that also sort of talks for the number of participants we have today. I think a lot of people have sort of tired of listening to or talking about COVID. But anyway, my research for at least what I will be talking today will focus on the securitization of health. So I'll take a look at, or I will explain what is securitization and what is the concept of security in relation to health. What are some of the policies which are being adopted by the government at the central as well as the state levels in relation to managing the COVID-19 pandemic, and also how these policies are being taken in the context of increased securitization, where the emphasis is on, say, using punitive measures involving the police and other forms of uh, ensuring that people stay in line. Uh, so that's one aspect which I will be talking about. The second part will deal with the context of India's health system itself, which is uh, in uh, in large parts in shambles. There is a very weak institutional setup, infrastructure setup at the government level as well as in various rural and uh, other uh, areas within the country. And in that sense, there is a lot of variation based on which state one is situated in. So I'll take a look at the context of the health system in India. And the last part will be looking at what are some of the policy options which the health ministry could adopt, keeping in line that the state or the at the state level, health is a much more implementative sort of decision where the state is involved in setting up infrastructure funding, while the center is largely policy making. So a larger role for the state, which does not ensure only security of health, but looking at a more wholesome idea of health where it's in line with WHO regulations and providing health for all. So that's the larger outline of the talk for today. I'll just uh, I'll just share my screen for a bit. Okay, so I think there's some issue with the screen. So anyway, uh, so the first point which I'll start off with is in relation to what is security, what is securitization of health, and one sort of notices how there are uh, what once was thought of as security as the role of the state and interactions between state, say during war or other forms of global terrorism, etc. It's probably in our current generation, at least, the first act of a pandemic striking across the world, uh, closing down borders and bringing security threats to individual life rather than interstate conflicts. And this has also sort of largely changed the way in which political, economic, and social structures exist or have been further uh, leading to further inequalities between different sections in society. Uh, so in that context, global coordination between different countries has been marginally reduced. It's now thought of, the pandemic is thought of as an internal security issue, uh, where the nation's security is in question. Uh, so also with the unpredictability of the COVID virus, the populations and the fears of uh, forms of disorder have prompted a lot of governments to take very tough measures. So in this context, the lockdown was something which we started off uh, with a complete lockdown across the nation uh, for 21 days, and along with the lockdown, there were also certain ideas of how it was seen as it's a situation of a war, where the Prime Minister says every Indian to be a soldier in this fight, likening, say, the lockdown to how the 18-day war was fought in the Mahabharata, and sort of emphasizing this high national security threat sort of issue. So it's in that larger rhetoric which has been adopted around securitization of policies and in relation to health, that the sort of policy measures which have been adopted in uh, during the lockdown and after also have been sort of increasingly uh, providing a presence for the police state. Uh, the police are involved in controlling the pandemic rather than health workers. And the way in which the lockdown also was implemented was interestingly used under a legislation which was passed during the colonial times to tackle the bubonic plague in Bombay in 1897. So the Epidemic Diseases Act was passed in 1897, and this colonial law was used along with the Disaster Management Act of 2005 to ensure the lockdown happened across this country. And these measures which were adopted are in a sense quite outdated. They don't fall in line with, say, more recent World Health Organization directives and other sort of appropriate measures which have been thought would be advisable to be adopted in the case of an outbreak of a pandemic. Uh, like most other countries, India's own government's uh, efforts were are largely a measures of different forms of lockdowns. The use of extraordinary measures to effect this lockdown also led to different effects on the people, with restrictions of movement and increase on surveillance of different people. And with the way in which during the initial days of the lockdown, uh, the ideas of, say, banging utensils from balconies and holding candlelight vigils, they seem to be more appropriate to rally the call among the people rather than providing, say, personal protective equipment and other infrastructure to ensure increased testing or other measures to reduce the spread of the virus. Uh, the way in which the lockdown also uh, was imposed uh, led to a huge impact on the lower or the marginalized sections of society. Uh, Most tellingly, the migrant crisis was something which highlighted the way in which various different sections of society were ignored by the government in dealing with the pandemic. Uh, Along with these larger ideas of rhetoric around securitization, there were also different partial lockdowns in various states because health, again, is a state issue rather than the center takes decisions on larger policy issues, but the implementation and the running of infrastructure is done at the state level. So the states also adopted a lot of different penal measures. The Jharkhand state government, for instance, uh, passed the Jharkhand Contagious Disease Ordinance Act, ordinance, which stipulates a jail term of 2 years, up to 2 years, and a fine of up to 1 lakh rupees for flouting guidelines issued to decrease the spread of the infection. The punitive measures which were adopted by the police was also seen in the sort of excesses uh, the reports of police excesses, especially during the initial part of the lockdown, uh, with police brutality leading to at least 12 deaths uh, because of their violations of, say, coming out during curfew and things like that. Along with these, the idea of press freedom also has been uh, largely sort of the state has imposed certain curfews on that too. So the idea of press freedom, which is very vital for the functioning of any democracy, uh, and especially in a public health crisis uh, right now, uh, the way in which different sections of the media were, especially those sections of the media which had some forms of criticism of the policies led to a lot of very punitive measures by the state. And in one of the reports made by Human Rights Risks Analysis Group, the uh, report stated that uh, during the crackdown, there were at least 55 journalists who faced arrest, uh, registration of FIRs, summons or show cause notices, physical assaults, alleged destruction of properties and threats for reporting on COVID-19, and also for expressing a freedom of opinion which uh, was about the lockdown and which was critical about the lockdown. So a lot of press personnel were also warned to behave properly with the threat of facing legal action under the Disaster Management Act for supposedly publishing one-sided stories. And even the Mumbai police went to the extent of calling a gag under Section 144. A gag order was issued on any person inciting mistrust towards government functionaries and the way in which they were dealing with the pandemic. Uh, Along with these, there have also been, as I was saying earlier, increased emphasis on efforts to increase surveillance, and governments at both the state and at both the central and the state levels have adopted different digital technology and surveillance measures without giving due consideration to the legal framework and India's social realities also. Uh, so especially the app like Arogya Setu and a lot of the different states have their own different tracking apps. Uh, so they are involved in digital contact tracing, informing users of their risk of infection. And along with these, there were also uh, issues of the data being uh, the right to privacy and the data being misused by various functionaries at the state level as well as within the private sector who are involved in developing these apps and working on these apps for the government. Uh, so the along with these other technological measures included tracking of people's movements through drones and facial recognition software also where uh, the individuals who were say required to be in quarantine and had been disregarding their quarantine rules would be captured through surveillance cameras installed at their locations and then would be swiftly brought back within quarantine. And this, along with the various other ways in which these are being implemented without any consideration for transparency or legal safeguards, can lead to the abuse of power by the state. And in addition, with a lot of the situation being that uh, less than half of India's population having access to the internet. Digital efforts like this, in terms of capturing the movement of people, of a vast majority of people who are left out, uh, do not actually translate into very effective policy. So those were the larger themes in which securitization of uh, health and the punitive measures which were being adopted by both the central government as well as the state government uh, imposed a lot of restrictions on different segments of people, marginalized sections, the press, and a lot of increased punitive measures by the police. Uh, so, in taking a step back to sort of look at what is the impact of COVID on different states, because different states have uh, very variable factors and indicators of health. So, in the case of the COVID 19 and the increased number of cases which we are seeing across states, the impact on uh, healthcare workers, especially being overburdened over such an extended period of time, and the weak infrastructure and sort of institutional capacity of the health system uh, has various implications for different socioeconomic uh, issues of development in at the state level. The capacity of different states vary in terms of the number of employees and the size of the infrastructure, the development of the infrastructure which is used in setting up uh, the public health as well as the private health sectors. India, in terms of numbers employed in the public health system, is one of the largest in the world. But despite the size of the health system, the density or the number of doctors and nurses, trained doctors and nurses who are available per capita is very low and is slightly low is slightly lower compared to what the recommended uh, number is by the WHO. And while this is the case, a lot of the variation between states also happen based on which region the state is in. So the western and the southern states are more developed, and in that sense are slightly ahead in terms of health factors compared to a lot of states in the north or even the northeast. And similarly, there is uh, differences, variation between the rural and the urban areas. So it's in that sort of uh, context that there are a lot of subnational variations within India, and within these variations there are also a mix of different uh, sectors. So there's a mix of both the public, the government-run primary healthcare centers, the referral and specialized hospitals, and the medical college hospitals. And you have the private sector hospitals, which are largely made up of clinics operated by general medical practitioners, specialized clinics, for-profit hospitals, and a small number of state governments, a small number of healthcare facilities run by philanthropic associations, voluntary groups. Uh, Public hospitals are mostly financed by state governments, and they account for only 10% of hospitals in the country. And in such a situation, the healthcare needs, especially in the wake of a pandemic, uh, leads to a situation where a lot of the healthcare work is taken care of by the private sector. And there have been various issues of malpractice and especially the way in which a lot of hospitals have been turned, or not only hospitals, but even private hotels being converted into COVID-19 clinics and hospitals. And as a result of these, there are various instances of malpractice, fires in ICU units across different states. There have been various complaints of the tests which have been conducted taking much longer to identify whether an individual is positive or negative. And cases also of the second instance of testing showing that the person was not positive, and because of which there have been situations of delayed provision of critical healthcare, leading to sort of preventable loss of lives. Uh, the labor force, the migrant force, which had returned to different parts of the country: Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Haryana, North Orissa, Bihar, Jharkhand, also sort of increased the pressure on an already weak infrastructure in those particular states. And the increased pressure is now being seen with increased number of cases in rural districts and areas which are uh, further away from the metropolitan cities. Uh, what have been some of the, and linking back with the state and or the federal state, the states, uh, the way in which they coordinate with each other, and uh, the securitizing of health at the state level. As I had mentioned, a lot of these uh, policies which had been pushed through uh, did not ensure certain democratic principles in terms of dialogue between different uh, political and non-political actors, civil society members, in adopting certain decisions, say uh, the requirement of mandatory installment of Arogya Setu before reporting back to work in public institutions as well as in private institutions, or other forms of, say, imposing Section 144 uh, repeatedly over different parts of different uh, periods of the last 8 months. And the way in which these measures have been adopted uh, definitely do indicate that there is an emergency of sorts. But the way in which it is adopted can also be seen in the context of uh, this being a series of continuous uh, decisions where the state uh, is not being involved in adopting certain policy decisions. It's largely being taken from the central high command. And along with this, the emergency measures which are being taken can become more formalized, even in a post emergency, or when the pandemic is over. A lot of these policy measures can become normalized, which will continue to impose various restrictions on individuals' democratic rights, including liberty and other aspects of, say, the person's right to earning a livelihood. Or even in the case of the lockdown, a lot of people lost out the option of uh, earning a livelihood, which is in a way uh, a direct assault on one of the human rights, one of the rights enshrined in the Constitution. So the way in which these policies have been adopted, they also appeal to, so they are in terms of the way they are imposed, there is a certain moral appeal in the way in which they're made on the citizens. Uh, the demands of, say, acting as a soldier or defending against in this war against COVID, and the punitive measures. Uh, both these uh, policy measures are sort of moving away governance from what it should be, which is open governance and communication with the citizens. So, because of this health emergency, the responses have led to certain infringements by the state in areas related to health, uh, as well as other rights of citizens, like the right to livelihood and movement and other associated uh, concerns. The way in which the punitive measures, say imposing of fines, has been used, also sees a lot of and there are a lot of reports every day of the amount of fines which are collected by the authorities, and varying from say 500 for the first instance to repeated instances leading to a fine of 10,000, 20,000, and even in some cases up to a lakh, say in the case of Jharkhand. Uh, the other sort of measure is the section 144 of the Code of Criminal Procedures, which sort of imposes a curfew. And this curfew, as a way of managing the COVID, especially a curfew which is imposed during the night, because they have a time of, say, from 9 p.m. To 6 a.m. Uh, also does not particularly address how the spread of the virus can be reduced during the day, uh, during which a lot more people are interacting with each other. And similarly, uh, during the initial part of the lockdown, there was also this sort of social media, as well as in the larger media, the way in which the question of national solidarity was being stoked through the rhetoric of securitization of health, especially by targeting certain minorities, including the Tablighi Jamaat congregation, and issues of racism also coming up with communities from the northeastern states who are stranded in various other parts of India, Uttar Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Gujarat, where because of this sort of xenophobia and uh, in the context of COVID and the connections with its origins in Wuhan, a lot of people were subject to racial abuse as well. So these are some of the ways in which the states also have been sort of quiet about these issues, and the larger issue of national solidarity, uh, say comparisons of the movement against COVID, uh, the campaign for an mass awareness being compared to, say, the Quit India movement against the British, which was made by Vijay Rupani, the Gujarat chief minister. And the positive measures of the state's act in managing the COVID has been using some of the enforcements or enforcing certain sections of, say, the Essential Commodities Act 1955, the Essential Services Maintenance Act 1968, to, say, regulate the prices of health essentials like the N95 masks and the hand sanitizers, and uh, even a lot of different states adopted these measures to keep a check on the increased rates of food essentials, and even to ensure the supply of uh, fuel or electricity, etc., were in place. The degree of openness in administration also varied in instituting these policy measures. A lot of the states such as Kerala, Delhi, Maharashtra were pretty engaged with the public in a very confident manner, with details on infections, the number of deaths, other statistics, and awareness campaigns with pretty clear directives, which were not similarly adopted in various other states. Say, for the instance of Madhya Pradesh, which during the initial days of the lockdown, not having a health minister uh, to direct the ministry's work. The increase in health capacity in terms of testing and care infrastructure also shows variation across different states. In an earlier situation, Delhi was fast running out of ICU beds and ventilators, and similarly, a lot of different metropolitan cities, Bangalore, Chennai, uh, Bombay, Calcutta, all of them running out of essential infrastructure. And the sort of data which shows the lack of or where state government hospitals are most saturated indicates that the states of Uttar Pradesh, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, Telangana, and Kerala are those states with the maximum concentration of these lack of ICU facilities. And to a certain extent, Delhi was successful again uh, in the last few weeks. The different second waves, third waves, which people are talking about, has led to a further crunch in provision of ventilators and ICU beds. Uh, there is also, in terms of openness of the administration in reporting of cases, a lot of different states have been accused of making the number of deaths being undercounted in sort of contravention to the WHO's guidelines. And a lot of suspected positive cases are not being added to the final count. And in such a case, the numbers being reflected far lower than what is actually the situation is not is showing a situation of the health system already being pushed past its breaking point. And also the fact that there is a paucity of qualified personnel to treat various different sections of society. Uh, the uh, technological and surveillance measures, as I was mentioning earlier, the uh, Arogya Setu app, which was developed by the National Informatics Center under the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, was also in consultation with various states which have developed their own apps for their regions and the languages which are spoken in those states. And as of a few, as of last month, there were about 90 odd apps which were developed by a small set of private IT firms, along with the official bodies, including the central, the state, as well as the district level authorities and the police as well. While none of these apps, there's a huge proliferation of these apps, but the way in which they have been issued and downloaded and the data which is being collected, there are no clear guidelines on how the privacy of the individuals and how the information which will be collected through these apps will be handled. Say who will have access to these details, and a lot of different states have also sort of insisted on collecting call detail records of patients who are identified as positive to ensure that people in those areas where they are moving or have moved receive warnings or are informed of their contact being a positive case. The way in which these measures are being adopted do indicate that there is a certain, uh, like the states are calling these policy measures being special cases, and especially the fact that these technological tools uh, do not have uh, any sort of transparency or legal safeguard. Uh, the coordination of different activities across states also has been sort of moving away from this principle of federal of cooperative federalism, which was one of the main issues on which the current Modi government came to power. And in uh, 2014, the BJP's election manifesto sort of made it clear that the Indian state would redefine center-state relations to promote federal cooperation in both law and practice. And the way in which various policy measures have been adopted even before the pandemic and in light of the pandemic do indicate that this is not the case. The outcome is that there is greater strain on federal ties between the center and the states. There's no sort of clear and consistent guidelines and communications coming from the center. States are also hampered by various sort of central administrative directives that are issued without giving sufficient time and other resources to prepare to implement these policies at the state and district levels. Further, the revenue losses which states have been facing and the continued way in which uh, the center holds on to funds which collected through the GST, which it owes to the states. Uh, the lockdown and the related economic losses have put various states in dire situations, especially in terms of their fiscal uh, reserves, which need to continue with a lot of different social and other related economic related programs. KT Thomas Isaac, the finance minister of Kerala, called the centre's stance to further delay the compensation uh, devoid of any sort of macroeconomic logic and untenable both legally and morally. And this sort of political blame game between state governments and local officials because of the lack of support from the center and its the way in which it uh, issues funds. The citizens who are facing these policy measures and the direct effect are uh, sort of expressing their ire at the lack of proactive state governments and officials, with the state governments blaming the center for not allocating enough funds and resources. So that's the larger way in which the uh, states have been involved, and the uh, way in which securitization has uh, imposed certain notions on the way in which health is thought, and uh, in relation to both the measures adopted, uh, most importantly at the central level, but also in relation to the state level activities. So the so while as I was saying, the uh, implementation of different policies happen at the state level. Uh, so a lot of the different ways in which policies could be adopted, and these are very sort of just uh, suggestions at large, which are based on certain observations from earlier instances and cases which have dealt with federal health politics. So one way of building a resilient and effective health system in India, having established the context of this state being weak and not enough infrastructure across uh, and the regional variation within states in India. Uh, so the policy measures also which need to be adopted, I think, need to be in line with keeping this point of federal relations between the center and the state. And it's in that context that 14 years ago, in the aftermath of the SARS, the severe acute respiratory syndrome, and the different, there was a conjecture that there would be the spread of various other strains of the avian flu. So a policy paper was published 14 years ago by public health researchers at the Joint Center for Bioethics, SARS Global Health Ethics Research Program. And the paper is titled The New International Health Regulations and the Federalism Dilemma. It pointed to the importance of pandemic planning and why the response should adopt an inherently multi-governmental approach. So the multi-governmental approach is something which the WHO, the World Health Organization, also advocates. And this helps in complex and coordinated public health responses and policy measures that involve the cooperation of both of multiple levels, so the local, the regional, the national, as well as the supranational governments like the WHO and its related bodies, including the non-state actors, say bodies like the People's Health Movement, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and also the communities which are affected by this health, whatever the health crisis is. So India's federal structure poses a dilemma, especially when such international treaties like the International Health Regulations 2005, which is signed by the central government and which India is a signatory to, uh, sees that at the center it has been adopted, but when these issues boil down to the state level, at the district level, they don't necessarily happen in practice. So there's not, in that sense, the effective implementation of these various technical guidelines which are issued by World Health Organization and other global health institutions do not happen in practice. And along with this, the Constitution of India lays down that it is a primary duty of the state, the national government, to improve public health, and thus has the authority to legislate in the areas of public health and sanitation. Uh, but however, the governments which are at the center and the state have, as I was saying earlier, concurrent powers in certain areas of health, such as preventive detention in order to maintain public order, which is seen with with the power of the state to impose quarantine during a disease threat, and restriction of movement of people, animals, goods within and between states. States also receive funds from the center to maintain and operate surveillance systems. So the reporting and notification of the data from such surveillance is, however, voluntary and not obligatory under the current central law. In India, the National Surveillance Program for Communicable Diseases, set up in 1997, which morphed into the National Center for Disease Control, is mandated with uh, undertaking disease surveillance through the Integrated Disease Surveillance Program. While over the years, uh, they have been reporting on and suggesting various measures to tackle India's changing disease burden. The reporting has been inconsistent, and with the outbreak of the COVID, they have sort of completely shut down, and there is hardly any sort of framework in which data is being collected and collated and shared with different authorities across state levels. Now, here again, there is state variation. For instance, in the case of Kerala in 2018, with the emphasis on redrawing the functions and the way in which departments are organized in the health sector uh, and the public health infrastructure, uh, especially was improved a lot uh, and helped in the quick identification and controlling the spread of the Nipah virus. The Gujarat government, on the other hand, which saw in light of the Surat 1994 plague, had installed a sort of detailed plan to deal with any future outbreak of infectious diseases. But the municipal authorities largely ignored those earlier plans and measures which were adopted in 1994. And Surat, in fact, has seen repeated cases of outbreaks of plagues every century, in fact, from the 17th century. And despite that, there are issues of uh, not learning from the history of one state. So, in sort of relation to the policy paper which I had referred to earlier, there are certain recommendations that can help improving the mandatory surveillance, which is supported by the states. The states support the center in collecting the data for the system. So when the state is involved in collecting these data as part of the surveillance programs, uh, there is a greater awareness at the state level what are the health data and how measures need to be adopted accordingly. And the center can support the states in terms of increasing funding and ensuring at least the technological uh, capabilities are provided for. The second suggestion, which especially with collecting data requirements which make it mandatory and reporting of details of the infected populations. If it happens at a regular interval, the process of keeping these data sets updated and accordingly uh, changing the policy measures in line with what these data, the population changes suggest, will again help in avoiding this federalism dilemma. Lastly, it's also sort of helps when there is uh, greater and more quick communication between all levels of government without the risk of dilution of cooperative federalism. So using the legislative and the administrative tools which states have to ensure that they have certain autonomy uh, over their own areas will help ensure that the central government has both the relevant information and that the communications between states can be coordinated by the center. So in uh, sort of to provide this legislative framework, India need not uh, devise an entire new plan of uh, engaging in different dialogues. The dialogues are, of course, required between different uh, policy actors, but they can also look at the legislative frameworks which have been adopted in other countries with similar sort of federal health laws. Say the case of developing countries like Thailand or Indonesia or Nigeria, which have recently adopted various measures which ensure that the reporting of the infections and more positive measures are adopted in managing the COVID pandemic. Uh, so, in sort of conclusion, I think the uh, COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the need to adopt policy measures at both the center and the state levels in managing the cases and preventing increase in infections. And given that there are a lot of different novel challenges the government, both the public, both the public as well as the governments face, it's almost the more pertinent to carefully consider the actions of countries that face similar concerns and look at what they have faced in terms of problems of implementation. And policy makers at the center and the state levels need to acknowledge the importance of conceptualizing health as a wider concern, which does not only locate it within health security, as in relation to internal national security, but also to deal with other health crises and more a broader understanding which health leads to greater socio-economic development. So in line with this, the national health policy, which was adopted, which was uh, adopted in 2017, can be revised and restructured in a manner that makes the health system wider and fairer and more integrated in terms of the laws and the obligations of the center as well as the states. This will help prepare, I think, for a new normal, keeping in mind the fact that another potentially deadly infectious virus could emerge anytime in the future. And also in the new normal, states cannot afford to go back to business as usual. The center and states in India must support uh, measures that enhance health capacities of different states and the infrastructure to develop a resilient and equitable health system that ensures health for all. So I think that's largely my talk. Thank you for listening. I am now open to questions, uh, clarifications, any sort of queries. So I think there are a few pointers and
Hi.
comments.
Hi. Hello. Can you hear me?
Oh yes, if you could just identify.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions here. Do you want me to read out or
So I can see your chat. I just
yeah, there are two questions in the chat box. So I'll
police.
just read out the question for the sake of the audience as well. Then you could like answer the questions. Is that okay?
If I could just read it out here because I'm seeing it.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
One question which has been raised from the heirs.
Yeah, that is it. My question. The police brutality. Well, I think is my question itself. Yeah.
Okay, you could ask your question then if you want to ask the question.
All right.
Correct.
Okay, so my question was that the police brutality that we saw in the COVID pandemic was like a beginning to something that we hadn't seen before, or not at this scale. So the videos that came out and the kind of uh, things that we heard of what was happening on the streets was very shocking. So my question is that will this be a base on which a harsher reality and harsher relationship that can be built between the police and the citizen, and will there a very idea of what is a citizen and what role that the police play in a country and in a state and in a city change after this? So does this become like the beginning of a harsher relationship between the two?
Okay, so I think even in even before the pandemic, I think the police were at least they had different targets and associated groups. They were going one after the other with the anti-CAA protests and even much before the Bhima Koregaon arrests. And but now I think with the role of the police in maintaining daily sort of order where you have to pass by constables to buy your groceries. It's a sort of situation of emergency where one is not used to seeing so many men in khaki around. And the harsher ways in which they're dealing with imposing of fines, putting people behind bars, lathi charges, uh, and also the other protests in which there are further more violent means, say the use of water cannons at most of these protests, including more recently at the farmer protests in and around Delhi. All of them do point to a situation of the police going out of hand, but I think that is something which is or has been there for quite a number of years.
Yeah, but there is a sense of normalization to the whole thing, like throwing water at in December, in late November at farmers is something that would have shocked us, but it doesn't look like it is shocking us anymore. So I think that is where I'm pointing towards that there's a sense of normalization of
Normalization,
sorry.
something. The normalization, I think, is
Yeah,
definitely something which all of us are getting used to.
yeah, we're all getting used to it. It just become a day-to-day affair to watch people being brutally physically assaulted by the police, and there's no sense of justice that is left to the whole affair. Okay, so the next question, I think I'll just read it so that the research seemed biased is what Chandan Bhanka says. There are certain aspects where government was not able to match the requirements of people. But saying that there was promotion of racial discrimination is totally wrong. Other than that, as for Arogya Setu, it was hailed internationally, even by organizations such as WHO. Considering the migrant movement thing, initially government didn't provide service, but then Indian Railways provided the support for migrant movement. Other than that, using the law that was framed back under the British rule, there was no better option. India has a population about 135 crores, and at that time, no one has had detailed information about COVID 19. As far as Tablighi Jamaat is considered, most of them were COVID positive when tested. Some of them were on expired tourist visa. Apart from that, several financial aids by the central government were made to the farmers. Other than that, provision for unsecured loans were introduced by the government. So it's a comment more than a question, actually. But
No, I do agree that the center and the states have adopted a plethora of different measures to address various concerns. The question is in terms of impact and direct reach of these measures in, say, the reach of loans to whoever it is, whether they are uh, daily wage laborers or people running pakoda counters or whatever uh, businesses they want to start. Uh, there have been various measures, but the way in which it's reaching people, I think, is something which needs to be looked at more carefully. And there are definitely, so I'm not blaming also the government for racial discrimination. It's definitely a social sort of larger malice which we see, but the silence of the government was definitely not called for during that time when a lot of different communities were being subject to racial discrimination, including the members of the WB Jamaat, and the way in which the harming was being done by the media as well as different political functionaries of the government, uh, and the silence from the higher commands within the government did definitely indicate a certain discrimination, a certain um, way in which they were trying to put down anyone who was not part of the majority. Uh, the question about the app, again, as I was saying, even though if it's internationally hailed, uh, the way in which it was adopted, the legal safeguards have been ignored, and there is no, there are multiple loopholes in the way in which details are collected through these apps. Uh, and I think, yeah, that's probably the larger points. Now, I don't
okay,
know if there are any
yeah,
other comments or questions.
no, there are no more questions or comments
Yeah.
anymore. So I think we'll just progress to the vote of thanks. Um, I I thank you so much for coming here today and making this such a success. Uh, I think because the classes have begun at many universities, it is becoming difficult for people to join us on Sundays as well. I mean, that's my understanding of what is happening. But apart from that, this was a really enlightening lecture, and it was a good, if people were like keeping up with the newspapers and the media and what was happening, then this was a good analytical recap of the whole situation in the past 1 year. And the arguments, the lucid arguments that you have presented, I'm very grateful for that. And thank you so much for coming to this platform and giving us this lecture today. And
Okay.
yeah, I also thank Ariba for making this actually happen, and Evangeline for being there with us. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much. And with this, I think I call this lecture to an end.
Yeah. Thank you to all for joining. Have a great Sunday. Take care and Bye.
Yeah. All right. Bye. Bye, everyone.